Well, we're going to continue our series on the I am statements in John. And a few weeks ago, we took the kids to go see a movie. Let me tell you, it was really dark. I'm not talking about the movie. The movie was about children riding dragons. So, that everyone loves that. Who doesn't love riding dragons? But the environment was dark. You're probably thinking, yeah, every movie theater is dark, right? That's just how it is. But you don't realize that you get desensitized to that darkness. All right? Do you know what desensitized means? Desensitized means you're around something so much that it just becomes normal. It just feels normal. And you don't even realize it anymore because you're just around it all the time. Well, we're in the movie theater and you get desensitized to the darkness. But then we came walking out of that movie theater and wow, the sun was absolutely blinding. I could not open my eyes. The radiance was just overwhelming. I felt like Paul on the road to Damascus. Who are you? It was just like it was painful. And you'll never guess what my first instinct was. To sneeze. That was my first. Do we have any sun sneezers in here? No? See? Now I looked it up. Less than 35% of the population is called the photic sneeze reflex. I know I probably talk about it too much. But less than 35% of the population has it. But it's genetic, which means 75% of my family has it. You'll never guess who doesn't. She feels left out very much. So that was my first instinct. But my second instinct was to go back inside, to get out of the light, to go back because it was so painful. It was overwhelming. But I also really wanted to go home. So I had some tough decisions I had to make in that moment. Now, do you remember the first time that you experienced the light of Jesus? So as we already read in John chapter 8, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Do you remember the first time you really were in the light of Jesus? It's kind of an overwhelming experience. You realize how dark, how sinful your heart is when you come into his light. And it's kind of painful, kind of scary. But you have a choice to make. Do you stay in the light or do you go back to the darkness where it's more comfortable, maybe, where it's more familiar? That's the choice that we're left with. Well, we're going to be looking at John chapter 1 for a minute. And how does the Gospel of John start? In the beginning. It's a good thing they didn't have copyright laws back then because I feel like John's plagiarizing from somewhere. Do you recognize it? Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning. All right, John's not plagiarizing. He's building off of the creation story in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, how does God create everything? Does he wiggle his little finger and stir the pot? No. He creates everything with his voice, with the Word. And what is the very first thing that the Word of God creates? Light. Light. That's the first thing. Let there be light. And it was so. And it was good. And John is going to tell us that this connection between the Word and the light goes even deeper than we even realize. So look again at John chapter 1, verse 4. Talking about Jesus here. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, we talk about darkness like dark. We know what the darkness out there. We can see the darkness out there. We know where it is. We know there's great evil out there destroying lives. But if we're honest, there's also darkness in our hearts too that Jesus needs to overcome. So now please turn in your Bibles to John chapter 3. John chapter 3. So we're going to see this theme of light is actually all throughout John's gospel. And we're not even, he talks about it so often. Jesus talks about it so often. We're not even going to look at all of them. So you're going to have to do that on your own. But John 3 is a big one. Look at verse 19. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of light because of their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth, and make a mental note of this idea of light and truth. Whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. Now this reminds me of another story early in Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve. So, right after they sinned, right after they took that fruit and broke God's command, what was their next temptation? Their next temptation was to hide. And why did they want to hide? Because they felt exposed. And they were exposed, weren't they? Like spiritually and literally. Not a pretty sight. Kids got to turn your eyes. Can't look at that. It was a bad situation. They knew they were in the wrong. They knew God could see them, and they wanted to hide. But children, can you hide from God? You can't hide from God. And they learned that lesson really, really quick. You can't hide from God. God, there is one who sees through the darkness. And so God comes and confronts them. Well, what's their next temptation? Do they own up to their mistakes? No, they start pointing fingers. They start blaming others. And kids, there is nothing that will prevent you more from maturing than blaming others for your mistakes. That one gets us, doesn't it? We want to blame others. Oh, the reason I'm this way is because you'll never guess what my parents were like. Oh, the reason I'm this way is because of how they treated me. The reason I made these bad decisions is not my fault, it's someone else's fault. And if you live like that, you will wallow in darkness. Trust me. I mean, we all got someone else that we want to blame. I've got someone else I want to blame. But you can't do it. You got to own up to your mistakes. Well, here in John 3, what Jesus is saying, there's no hiding. You think you can hide, but you can't. You think the darkness is going to protect you, but it doesn't. Even those who live in darkness, God sees through the darkness. So, you might as well come into the light. You might as well, since you can't hide anyways, come out of the darkness, come into the light, and you have to acknowledge what Jesus says here, that everything we do, all of our life, is done in the sight of God. Whether you think you're in darkness or not, it's all done in the sight of God. There is no hiding. And it's interesting what Jesus says here. What is it that prevents people from coming into the light? It's fear. It's fear of being exposed, just like Adam and Eve. It's fear of being exposed, of God and God's people seeing the real us, seeing how messed up we are, the depths of our depravity. That's a scary thing. There's a reason we're afraid of that. But Jesus is saying, you have to come into the light. It's the only way you'll have freedom. It's the only way you'll have real life. Now go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. So this idea of life and light. Life and light are connected, aren't they? We know this. Do we have any gardeners in here? Yeah. Does your garden need light? Absolutely, right? Everything that is good needs light. For you, best way to get vitamin D, right? Just go get some right after church, just for a few minutes. Just stand out there. But if something thrives in the darkness and grows in the darkness, it probably isn't good for you. Probably not. So spiritually, your heart might look like a basement full of black mold. What do you need? You need to come into the light to let God heal you and change you and fix you. Now, you're going to be tempted to turn away. You'll be tempted to go back into the darkness because life feels easier there, but that is a deception. That is not true. Now, look at what Jesus says in John chapter 8, verse 12. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Walking in darkness is not safe. Have you ever tried it before? Walking in darkness is a dangerous business. There's a lot of people who end up in the hospital because they got up in the middle of the night and they tried to walk in darkness. I actually almost fell on Kristen yesterday. I don't know if she knows this or not. I almost fell over when I had to get up. So it's not a safe thing to do. And Jesus says, if you follow me, the light of your path, the path of your life will light up, and you'll see the hazards. You'll see the pitfalls. You'll see what's going to make you trip and stumble, and you'll be able to stay away from that. But if you stay in the darkness, if you live in the darkness, this will prevent you from seeing reality. People who explore caves, people who go cave diving, and sometimes they'll spend a long time in caves, maybe even spend the night there. They say that at some point you might start to hallucinate if you stay in the darkness long enough. Our brains were not made to be able to handle dwelling in darkness. It messes with our minds. You won't be able to understand reality at some point if you stay there. And so living in darkness, people think that they're free. People think they have real life. But it's a deception. Their minds are twisted by the darkness. Do you remember the last time that the power went out at your house during the middle of the nights? It's kind of an overwhelming experience, especially if you were asleep and the power goes off and it's just pure blackness. You can't even see the hand in front of your face. It's a difficult situation. We like to go to cathedral caverns. Who's been to cathedral caverns? If you haven't gone, it is definitely worth going. The whole thing's paved in a sidewalk, so anybody can go. And if you can't even walk, they will bus you in a little golf cart. So it's totally worth going. But when you get to the end of the cave, they turn off all the lights, and you experience pure darkness, unless there's like some punk kid with a cell phone who won't turn it off. But when they turn off all the lights in that cave, how safe is it for you to go walking around? No, if you walk around, you're going to die. It's a dangerous cave to be walking in the dark. You can't do it. So we need light. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And as we looked at in John chapter 1, and you'll experience this if you go to a cave or if the power goes off in your house. What happens when you just get the tiniest source of a light? Just the tiniest source. Just a candle. What does the darkness do? It flees. The darkness flees the light, even from the tiniest source of light. Now, we know where the darkness is, don't we? We know in our families, in our community, we know where there's brokenness. We know where there's self-destructive choices. We know where there's hopelessness. So what do they need? Well, think of that great prophecy from Isaiah that gets quoted in Matthew. Those living in darkness have seen a great light. Those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. They need the light of Jesus. And here's the incredible thing. It says, John chapter 1 shows us Jesus came to overcome the darkness. And when he overcomes the darkness in your life, in your hearts, and you come into his light, all of a sudden, you get drawn into the mission of Jesus. You don't just live in the light of Jesus, you are now a part of the mission of Jesus. Because what does Jesus tell us in Matthew 5, that Sermon on the Mount? Can you imagine being there on the mountainside when Jesus is preaching and he looks at the crowd? He says, you, and he points at you. He says, you are the light of the world. If I had been there, I'd be like, you're not pointing at me, are you? Do you know who you're talking to? And he says, you are the light of the world. Well, where does that light come from? Does it come from me? No, it comes from God. But we are now in the mission of Jesus to be his lights. So we all know the children's song, right? You got to remove that bushel. You got to let it shine. The people around you need that light. They need it. You can't keep it hidden. Now, you can't make people stay in the light. When you shine the light of Jesus, they may not like it. Because it's a little painful at first. Just like coming out of that movie theater. It's a little bit blinding. It's a little bit painful. And they may not like it. People don't like having their hearts exposed. And they may feel exposed just being around you. So be ready for that. But they're going to have an opportunity to stay in the light. To come to the light. To see Jesus. If you will, please turn to the book of Ephesians. We're going to end in Ephesians. And you might be asking, so what does it look like to walk in the light of Jesus? And Nathan, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Thank you very much for that. So John, the Gospel of John is great about delivering the great pillars of truth. But there's not a lot of practical applications in some of this. Well, in Ephesians, Paul devotes a big chunk of Ephesians to this idea of being the light of God, of walking in his light. So in Ephesians chapter 5, look at verse 8. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So Paul gets a bit of science here. Gives us a little bit of a science lesson. Why is it that we're able to see? Is it because we stare at the light? Is that why we can see? No. The reason we see is because the light reflects off of something else or someone else. That's what allows us to see. So he's saying people, they're not staring at Jesus. They're staring at the reflection of his light, which is you. And that is going to lead them to Jesus. So the incredible thing is this is like the climax of this whole section on living as God's light. It starts in chapter 4. So flip over to chapter 4 in verse 25. Now, we're not going to read all of this. I'm just going to highlight what he's talking about. So verse 25, it actually starts before 25, but this is where he gets to the nitty-gritty, just daily life kind of stuff. So verse 25, putting off falsehood, speaking the truth. And we're going to see this connection between light, life, and truth. We're going to see this time and time again. What's the next thing? Getting rid of anger. Don't let the sun go down on it. Earn an honest living so that you can buy that yacht. Wait, scratch that. So you can help those in need. So you can help those in need. What's next? How do you talk? What's your speech like? Do you have purity of speech? Do you talk in a way that builds people up rather than tear them down? And then, forgive each other in the same way that Jesus forgave you. And then chapter 5. Flip over to chapter 5. Walking in love. Now, walking in the love of Christ, that's not the mushy feelings that the world says is love. We're talking about tough, calculated sacrifices for each other. That's imitating Jesus. And then he's got a whole paragraph about putting away immorality, impurity, greed, which he says are all forms of idolatry. And then we get to that section that we just read. But he actually continues about living in the light. Verse 15, he says, you got to learn to be wise, living in wisdom, which means staying sober, worshiping God every day, staying in prayer every day. And then this crazy verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Do I really have to submit to Daryl out of reverence for Christ? Yeah. That's called humility. Do I have to submit to you out of reverence for Christ? That is humility. But we all submit to one another out of our reverence for Jesus. And then he goes to talk about marriage. He goes on to talk about the parent-child relationship. All of this is living in the light of God. So, go back, look at these instructions for this week. This is a good place to start, to learn to live as children of God's light. So, I say, reflect his light, and you might just make the world sneeze. But once they get over that, maybe they'll open their eyes and they'll see the truth. They'll see the truth of Jesus shining in you. And if they look long enough, they're going to see a path lit up, a path that leads them home. And that is our hope, not just for us, but for this entire world, especially our families, our neighbors, everyone that we care about. And so the stakes are so high. The stakes are so high for us to be God's lights. It's not an option. It's not, I'll do it on Sundays. The stakes are high for us to be his light at all times. Because not only is God always watching, but someone else is always watching. Someone we may not even know about. There's always somebody looking up to us. There's someone always seeing, always wanting to know, do we really take Jesus seriously? Do we really take the Christian life seriously? So let's live out the commands that Jesus gives us.